Othering Podcast explores the world of marginalized communities with a focus on the disabled and LGBTQ+. In our discussions, we will provide a platform for our guests to advocate and share their stories. By delving deep into their difficulties and successes, we will explore the changes necessary to improve lives everywhere. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Othering Podcast with Mike and Dory.
Hello.
Hello.
What's that? I thought I'd go into the waiting room, sorry. We just kind of crashed right in there.
No, not a problem.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, yeah.
Today we are talking to Fiona. She spent lots of time in the workforce and found that with her autism and ADHD, she became very burnt out very quickly. It was very debilitating, and at times she could barely move from ADHD paralysis. So at that time, she decided to become a stay-at-home mom for 10 years, and she focused on becoming a coach. She studied mental health and coaching during that time and wanted to help others with similar issues to her. And in the end, she came up with a program designed specifically to help moms with a late diagnosis of ADHD. And it sounds like a very interesting and very effective program, and I'll let her explain it. Welcome, Fiona. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So, since I mentioned it, do you want to kind of talk about your program and the coaching you do for the ADHD moms?
Yeah, so the coaching package I made, it was a lot of the way because particularly in the UK, there wasn't a lot of courses when I started making it that was designed for people with ADHD. And there wasn't a lot to help mums either, really. It was all designed around your children having ADHD. Now, I'm not sure what the wait list is like in America, but in the UK, I think it took me around about 4 years to get my diagnosis. And my son has been on the waiting list for his for, goodness, about 7 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a long wait. So it seemed really important to have something there for mums who were starting and not even necessarily having your diagnosis. Self-diagnosis works as well. It's really important in the UK as well. But just having that support mechanism and that help with coping, with learning about your diagnosis, because it kind of shifts how you see yourself. And there's a little bit of anger and grief there around everything that's kind of happened in your life up to that point that didn't really make sense. And yet, well, if I knew, everything would have been so very different. But as well as that, it can help put really lovely, I like to call them gentle routines, because they're very sustainable. And it doesn't matter if you miss them. There's no pressure or anything like that. But it can help to kind of make school runs, parents' evenings, and things like that, where there's a lot of stress involved, a lot easier. The other thing we really work on is self-acceptance and learning to like yourself as well, because when you have something like ADHD or autism, so often there's a lot of negative voices around you, saying that you're doing things wrong or you should be able to just get through it or do better. So it's kind of working against that and saying, no, you know what? Productivity isn't really that important to me. I'll do what I can. I'll work to my pattern where I can. And then if I really need to, I'll alter some things to make my day easier, not to make yours easier, because it's not really a support we have very often. And also just that place where there isn't judgment and there is no expectations and you're not going to get in trouble for not doing what you said. It's just that place to kind of be told it's all right. We'll just work on it again in a different way. It's just that support system.
And that's really beautiful because so many people don't get any kind of support system, especially around neurodivergence, where it's just like, well, why didn't you just fix that? Or why can't you pay attention to the details? And, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you able to produce at, Barbie's level type of thing? And it's always, you got to kind of go above and beyond what even most normal people can do.
Yeah.
And trying to mask too, and realizing that you're masking. is another one of those parts that just kind of makes you exhausted.
You're right. You're right. I think so often you don't even realize you're masking all the time. It becomes so essential that when people get a diagnosis, another thing a lot of people find is they have to kind of go back quite a few steps and almost relearn who they are. You know, it's a very strange time with a lot of grief involved, because when you start to move back all these pieces out of there, sometimes you don't know which part is you, which part is the ADHD, and which part is the mask, and which part is the autism.
Yeah.
So there's a very real kind of learning journey that a lot of people probably did in their teens. So it's quite a unique situation, I think. And then if you have children as well, chances are they're likely to be neurodivergent. So you're kind of working around their needs and working out your own needs at the same time.
How old were you when you got your diagnosis of ADHD
And
You know, it was only about
and autism?
4 months ago now, so I just turned 40.
okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, you're young.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since you mentioned that you just recently got your diagnosis, how was it for you growing up? Like, did you feel different? Did you feel like you were out of place, type of thing?
Yeah, I think in childhood I was really lucky because I had a very good group of friends. But I think when they weren't around, I was quite often targeted because I was a bit of a daydreamer. I wasn't really too fussed whether people were around or not, to be honest. There was the usual report card things like you get, you know, would be really clever if they applied themselves and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. And I don't really know what she's looking at out the window. There's only a brick wall there, but she's more interested in the lesson. You know, there was a lot of that. I think senior school or secondary school was a bit tougher because then you kind of had to fit in, and I wasn't really into the same kind of things. And then when I started my work life, it became really much more obvious then, and I got a lot of misdiagnoses because there's a part of ADHD and autism called justice sensitivity dysphoria, and that becomes really important in the workplace because you will try so very, very hard to be the best of the best because of the perfectionism, but then you would miss out on things like promotions because you would be off a lot because of burnout. So it always felt very unfair, and then it would be hard to keep going when it didn't feel fair because I kind of have this thing where I have to just go to the person and say, you know what? I don't think that's right. And it doesn't go well in the workplace.
No, it doesn't.
So yeah, that happened a lot. And then other times it would be, and I blame the ADHD family for this, but I would just slowly lose motivation. And then it would be really hard just to get up and to go to work. And I'd go to the doctor and they'd go, well, are you feeling anxious? And I'd go, no. And they'll go, are you feeling depressed? I'd go, no. And go, well, what is it? It's like, I just really can't make myself go to work today. You know, so it was really difficult even knowing what to put on a sick note when it was kind of this really, really, really strong, not wanting to, doesn't sound strong enough, kind of like a reluctance, a sense of dread around work, but it wasn't born from anxiety or depression. I was quite happy. So I changed the whole kind of work I did, and I moved into mental health because I enjoy working with people. And I thought maybe it's because I don't feel aligned with the cause. But even then, it kind of morphed a bit, and because I loved it so much, I just kept going back into work. I didn't use holidays or anything. I just kind of hyper-focused on the job until I started to burn out. And that was when the ADHD paralysis hit. And that was really the worst part of ADHD for me because I'm a very active person. But because there was so many decisions to make and I was so fatigued, it was like I just couldn't move. If I was feeling really determined, I'd get up, I'd sit on the edge of the bed, but then all of the energy and everything was kind of drained away. And I could still be sat on the edge of the bed, by the end of the day just not really able to move or go anywhere or do anything. But there was no explanation for it. The only reason we really found out was because we were looking for diagnosis for my son, which is a thing that happens a lot here. Women were not diagnosed.
Yep.
Because a lot of it looked like just being a bit of a dreamer, really. So there's a massive catch-up now in understanding the other side of hyperactivity, which is much more psychological than physical. We kind of caught up, and then we realized that it was essentially ADHD paralysis or decision fatigue and just not being able to do anything, really.
And you mention all of these things that just, as you rattled them off, it just kind of like, oh my God, that's what I do. Oh my God, yeah, that I know that feeling. Because when I started teaching a while ago, and right now I'm not, but when I started, I was like, oh, I love this. This is going to fulfill me. And I put my all into it, and I was, masking and being the entertainer. It kind of felt like I had to be the entertainer for my class. And I would come home so drained and exhausted, and just like, it felt like an anxiety would kind of come over me and just be like, oh, I got to do this again tomorrow. Oh my God. Oh my God. And then when I got fired, laid off, whatever they want to call it. And at first I was just like, oh no, I needed this job. Not really, but I did. But I felt like, my identity was kind of tied to it. And I had put so much into doing it that, the perfectionism and having to make sure that every single person got what they needed out of it, and not stepping back to kind of see, well, what do I need out of it too?
Yeah.
And that constant putting everybody first and such, I realized after a bit, I'm actually happier not going there and having the anxiety attacks of, oh my God, I got a bunch of new students and how am I going to mask this time type of thing going on in the back of my head, and not realizing that these were conversations I was having, kind of just going through day to day, just kind of trying to be the person I was supposed to be, what it seemed like I was supposed to be. And I too got those report cards where, oh, she's daydreaming, and yes, she would be so wonderful if she paid attention, and oh, she's quite the chatterbox, and all of those things. And I just always felt kind of bad because I couldn't help it. And my parents thought I was neurodivergent, and they understood, but of course the school doesn't know this. So unless you have the diagnosis, they just kind of fuss at you and label you as difficult or whatever it is that they're thinking, instead of actually trying to work with the student. And here it's very pervasive of, well, it's supposed to be a boy's diagnosis. And we're kind of trying to play catch up with the females because, again, like you said, we're not always 100%, jumping off the walls, doing parkour at school type of thing. And we're more quiet or, more kind of withdrawn and daydreamers as opposed to it. And just, it's kind of refreshing hearing somebody else mention those things too, and kind of help me kind of, I guess you could say, feel better too.
Good.
Because like like you, I grew up thinking I was odd, I was off. I had friends and they would love doing, going to the mall and sitting there and just hanging out. And I would be like, this is so boring. This is not what people do.
Yeah, exactly that. It is. And it's good that more people are talking about it now, because it really did feel a very isolated place at that age. Teenagers weren't interested in talking about differences or anything like that. But I think it was always kind of noticeable. It always made you feel a bit self-conscious. And that's when the masking really starts. That's when you kind of lose yourself to masking a bit, because it becomes a survival mechanism. And then you lose this part of yourself that is so integral, because I think, I love that ADHD to me is more of the society module kind of disability. If the world was a bit different, then we would be fine.
Yes.
If productivity wasn't the most important thing, if flexible working was more important,
yes,
even down to your parenting style. If it was more kind of just letting them run free, find out who they are, then you'd probably be the greatest parent in the world. All things like this, it's all down to how you viewed in society and what society finds important, not the individual, not the family. In that, it's a comfort in a way, I think, but I think in another way, it's also wildly annoying.
Yes.
If the world was about creativity or something, we'd probably rule it.
Yes, definitely.
It just depends.
And it's that hyper independence versus the whole, well, you're supposed to fit in and look like everybody else at the same time. And that's, I think, where a lot of the problem kind of hits for teenagers in trying to figure out who they are anyway.
Yeah.
Then on top of neurodivergence, having that with you and not necessarily knowing it because you weren't, like I said, doing parkour down the street and things like that constantly, then you're just like, well, who am I supposed to be then?
Yeah.
How am I supposed to look? So then I can fit in better and nobody's making fun of me because, I didn't have, for me personally, I didn't care to have posters of famous people in my room. I just thought it was silly. Yeah. These are people. Why do you want them on your wall? Kind of thing. And that's my thought process. But, everybody else is like, oh, I so love so-and-so. And isn't he dreamy? And so I would do that too, because I felt like, well, I got to fit in.
It's right as well. And I think that's why a lot of girls maybe weren't diagnosed. I think we were so hypersensitive because of the way kind of girls are brought up. You are kind of meant to notice how people are feeling and be a bit more happy to please, maybe. So when all these other girls have all these posters up and things, it's kind of like, well, if I put posters up too, or if I dye my hair, or whatever, then I can keep fitting in. It almost becomes a hyper focus to fit in. So it isn't until really you go to college or university or try to fit in a workforce that you start to notice that no amount of masking is going to work because it's depleting your energy source along the way. So all this time you're using double the effort because you're using it on social skills, but then you're using it on being productive. Yeah. And you frazzle so much faster because of it, but it got you through school when you could kind of coast a bit because probably you were quite clever.
Yes. I did find ways. Like, I always thought of, and, pardon my French, I know it's not French, but I would always be really good at bullshitting through essays and tests and such. And because I just could figure out how to word things so it sounded like I was way above, and maybe I really was way above what they were asking for, but I just said, oh, well, this makes sense, so I'm going to use logic to answer it. And so I would do that, and they're like, oh, my God, this is so good, and, awesome work there. Why can't you do this all the time? Because you're not asking me to bullshit all the time.
This is it, when you've kind of got that bit of freedom to put together maybe your own essay or make your own project, then learning is really fun. I think for me it was almost a really enjoyable thing when I could get all the highlighters out and all the pens and pencils, and I could just sit and make it pretty and say what I wanted to say. But then when you were sat in a classroom and having to, one thing we had to do that my kids don't so much is learn the times tables.
Yes.
Like drilled in here.
Yes.
And I still don't know my timetables now. I'm fairly good at math, but times tables, can't do them because that kind of resistance to structure was such a big part of it. So there's so many, like reading, I could read for days, but because I didn't bother at school, there's words that I still pronounce wrong when I see them written down. Even though I always excelled, because I wasn't taught it by a teacher or anything, there's things I say and my partner goes, that's not how you say that. That's not right.
Yeah, I have those too, or where it's like, I have those moments where I'm reading something and I know how to pronounce it, but I look at it and it's like, purpose? What is this? And it's like my brain just kind of like has these massive, I call them like brain farts, where it's just like, you know what it is, you know what it means, but it's like, you can't pronounce it. And
it kind of like the knowledge just vanishes for a minute or two.
Yes.
You get ahead of yourself and then you try to catch back up. and throw yourself off of it almost.
And it's amazing at how, even though we're an ocean apart, at how similar it is between the diagnoses and trying to even get there, and similar upbringing of just masking from a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And you mentioned math. I was really good at math, but get me in front of anything to do with fractions and I fall apart.
Yeah.
Fractions kill me all the time. And it's not like I don't understand what they are. I get it. If you were to ask me if 3/4 is more than 7/8, yeah,
Needlessly
maybe.
complicated,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And it's just like, it's almost as if you're speaking to me in a totally different language.
It is more.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Just so you know.
I didn't know.
Thank you, Mike.
My dad drilled math into my head really hard.
And, but, and then, like, for instance, the way that Mike was, I think he kind of also is neurodivergent, because there are things that he does and says that are painfully obvious to me.
Yeah.
And do you have a tendency to kind of feel like you see it so well in others, but
Yeah.
it's like trying to turn it back onto yourself? You're just like, yeah.
Absolutely. There is so many people, when I was at work, I'd be talking to them and they'd be asking us about it. And then they'd go, do you know, Faye, I think I might be as well. And you're thinking, yeah, almost certainly. There's not a doubt in my mind, but it's not my place to say it.
Yes. It's because it's almost as if there's a pattern.
Yeah.
And we're seeing those patterns. And this kind of actually is epiphany to me, because when they talk about you see patterns, I'm thinking like mathematical patterns.
Social patterns are so important as well, though, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And it just dawned on me that patterns are everywhere, not just mathematical. And I know that sounds like, well, you're 47. How did you not realize that? But it's one of those things where, again, you get into your head because of social, and because of, various bombardments from other people, and, everything that is patterned has to do with math.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the thing is so many of our hyper focuses comes down to how we see patterns as well. For me, it's always been psychology and people in distress has always been kind of where I've gravitated to, because I know that I'm calm in a crisis, but more than that, there's a really clear pattern in how people behave when they're in distress. So it's almost like that's the kind of patterns that I see. And similar with languages, I love learning languages. Like Duolingo is used so much in our house because there's such a fun pattern in speech. German is so different to say and so fun to say. And then French is so flowy and lovely to say. And all these things are just different kinds of patterns, aren't there?
Yes, there are. And again, I kind of feel stupid for not realizing that at my age, but it's just the patterns that I was always taught about was, again, math. There's patterns in math, but there's patterns in reading, there's patterns in people, there's patterns in just colors too.
Yeah, and like when you study things like creative English and things, you literally learn a formula for how to write stories. They're literally everywhere. It's just we are kind of almost conditioned to see maths as patterns and art, artists' art, as patterns, and not really much else.
Exactly. Nothing else could possibly have a pattern to it because it's supposed to be random, but randomness is a pattern.
It is.
And it's just noticing those things. And I do agree with you at how I have a tendency to notice when people are kind of upset.
Yeah.
And people always gravitate towards me, telling me, I've never known them before, but all of a sudden they'll tell me their life story.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that a lot, where it's just like, well, why are you telling me this?
Absolutely.
But it's because with my neurodivergence, I tune into a lot and I get hyper-focused a lot with how people feel.
Yeah. And I bet you kind of understand a lot of the feelings as well. There's so much around kind of self-worth with neurodivergency. So often, I read a statistic where I think it was like 8 out of 10 people with neurodivergency are told like twice as many negative things about themselves.
Yes.
Like my son Charlie, he's like, God bless him, he's brilliant, but he's like Captain ADHD. He is the bounciest, most hyperactive person in the world, and the way people treat him compared to my son, who's more reserved with autism, is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because Corey is much more laid back, people are kinder to him. And I find a similar thing in the school system as well. Charlie can kind of disrupt, and so he doesn't get as much one-on-one time. You can see how all these things that kind of lead to this thing where you'd be so sensitive to hurting people, and so sensitive to seeing those little shifts in your demeanor because you probably made them yourself at some point. So when somebody flinches at something, you're probably like, hang on, I've done that and they don't feel good. I need to do something. It's just kind of drilled into us a bit, isn't it?
Yes. And like I've mentioned this before, but like when I was little, my parents always loved to talk about how we would be watching, I was probably about 3 or 4, and we would watch those old claymation Christmas specials. And my first thought after watching Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was Santa's prejudiced. And that was my first thought, not the animation, not anything else, just, wow, Santa's prejudiced.
Poor Rudolph.
Yeah, poor Rudolph. And I grew up kind of like with that innate sense of that's wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny looking back at how I knew that so early. And it's also funny looking back because that's like another one of those you're neurodivergent moments that don't kind of dawn on you until you look back at it, because they always say justice is a very ingrained, natural kind of feeling for those of us that are neurodivergent, of noticing those patterns of that's not right and we got to fix that. And then kind of feeling like, and when we can't fix it, I don't know how you feel, but it kind of drains me.
Yeah, it hurts. It's kind of a relentless thing because it's something you need to put right. And especially when you're little, you're powerless to do anything.
Yes.
And especially when you're fighting Santa because you're not going to have much luck.
Yeah,
and you're taking it personal.
Yes. That's the other thing, is that I have a tendency, Mike does too, where, like, not to speak for you, but he grew up being mercilessly mocked and bullied. And those things, I mean, just I could go on a rant for days about how awful that is, but it kind of makes him more sensitive of a person. And that's kind of, I think, a more manly and more humanistic aspect. But, we can get into man stuff later. But I just noticed those patterns, and I think that's kind of also what drew me to him, was that I noticed that pain of knowing that you're different and there's nothing wrong with being different.
Yeah.
But being kind of forced into a hole or a box and having to be something that you really aren't.
Yeah, absolutely that. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it makes such a big impact when you go through school and you are taunted or mocked or something. I think it can alter your whole personality almost. I know when I was really, really little, I was always the bounciest person in school. But then when that became more of a problem for other people, it's almost like I moved away from the physical hyper part of ADHD and became so very reserved, but all the activity was just in my head instead.
Yes.
So I think it's very altering as an experience, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Because, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Did you have a lot of mental health issues when you were going through this and kind of trying to blend in with everyone, and when you were discovering why you were like this?
More when I was at school.
Yeah.
And I think that was when things like bullying got quite bad. It's that I just became so very, very, very reserved. It was like I kind of really wanted to just be a shadow or not there.
Yes.
It became a desperately sad time. In the workforce as an adult, it became much more about not so much trying to fit in and mask. I think I was still masking then, but it was more trying to fit into people's timetables, because I just don't have the social battery. As much as I love people and I love being around people, I can get very drained very quick. So because people saw that I was quite outgoing and chatty with people, they thought I was having the best time ever. And you're like, no, talking's just a formula. And I felt tired like 10 minutes after being in the office, and I must go.
Yes.
It's just I could keep the pattern going long enough to be able to make it through a workday. But then when I got home, there was just nothing left in the tank, and getting up to go the next day was so very hard. So I think it was a different kind of masking as an adult. It didn't really lead to mental health issues the same way. When I was younger, I think I was almost certainly very depressed and extremely anxious. But as an adult, it was more around energy levels. And that's why we couldn't really diagnose anything when I was off. They were like, if you're not depressed and you're not anxious, then there's nothing wrong. And they would kind of imply it was laziness. But that didn't make sense to us either, because especially when I was working in mental health, I was very hyper-focused on the job. I just physically couldn't make myself do it or go into the office anymore or wherever I was working at the time.
Yeah. But the fact that sorry.
No.
The fact that it would be, well, if you're not anxious and you're not depressed, then there's got to be nothing.
Yeah.
That's kind of wrong.
Absolutely.
On so many levels, wrong. Because that's not the default where it's like, oh, well, you're just happy and you're being lazy versus you're depressed and anxious.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very frustrating. So I said, no, I want to go to work. I want to be there. I'm just exhausted. And you can't be that tired, because everyone does these shifts. Everyone can do it. And the thing is, it's really counterproductive as well, because if you're being forced, say, to go to an office between 9 and 5, but your energy levels isn't a straight line, then they're only getting about 20 minutes of good work out of you before you're exhausted. Whereas especially after COVID, where it's kind of proved so many working environments can be flexible and can be done from home, if your breaks and things could fit around that, you could probably be the most productive person in any room ever.
Yes.
It's such a kind of well-known thing with ADHD, where you can do like 4 days works in 20 minutes.
Yep.
If you let someone work 20 minutes, then rest, and then work again, you're going to get 8 days work out of them in like 4 hours or something. You'll be fine.
Yeah, and there's been studies recently that have come out talking about the fact that people, when they were forced to be home during COVID, that they were way more productive than when they had to be in the office from 9 to 5. And that they actually got more out of men and women both, because they were able to be, with their families and recharge with their families and friends, and then come back a couple of hours later and churn out some of the best work that they ever did. But that's because they were able to go and work around their time, their mental breaks and such.
That's right. And it's more comforting, I think, when you can be around your family. When you can take a break and go downstairs and give your little person a cuddle or your partner a cuddle and then come back up to work, you just feel refreshed, don't you? It kind of gives you that new bit of energy to get the day done. You literally remember what you're doing it for, because they're downstairs.
I always assumed it was mental health for me, but all of this sounds very familiar. Like when I go to work, I spend so much time thinking about what other people are thinking about me.
Yeah.
And I don't talk much because I'm worried about what other people will think of me. So it's, like you said, very draining. And I think that's my form of masking in a way as well.
Yeah,
but it's just very draining. And yeah, my work would be better if I didn't have to deal with people. For sure.
Absolutely right. It is just, it's kind of, I know a lot of people think masking is kind of being outrageous and loud, but I think as much as that, you do get the people who want to be the class clown. If you're going to laugh at us, it's going to be on my terms.
Right.
But then I think there is the people who kind of camouflage into a group, and then there's the people who kind of camouflage into the shadows instead. And I think it changes through life as well. I think you can move between the three really easily.
Yeah,
Same.
because I think it depends on the situation, the people that are there. Because
And how
there
you
are
feel at
times
the time.
when,
Yeah.
like when I was in teaching, when I was in front of the classroom, I felt like I had to be the class clown type of
Yeah.
thing in order to entertain them, to keep them engaged so that they could learn from me. And
Yeah.
then there would be other instances like at graduations or with the kids or something, just even growing up. I wanted to be the fly on the wall
Yeah.
and just observe, not have to talk, not have to do anything, just observe. And
Yeah.
then there are other times where I just wanted to blend in and, be, I guess you could say, the popular kid and actually be liked and things like that. And it would just kind of depend on what was going on in my life, where
Yeah.
I was. And even today, it kind of, I go through those moments where I have to be the entertainer versus I have to be the fly on the wall versus I just want to be in a corner.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think
part
it's
of
right.
that's
I think it does depend on where you're at on that day, or even where you're at in a more long-term place. At school there was no way I was going to talk to anyone. All the way through that time I was going to stay as far away from people as I could.
Yes.
But then when I thought, you know what, I'm not this person, I went from that to literally the exact opposite and became the loudest person in the world. I went into sales work, and everything I did was about being proven that I could be around people, and it wasn't me, it was them, and all of that. And it kind of, I think it very much depends on where you feel like you're at the time. And there's so many factors. There's the day-to-day factors, there's confidence, there's kind of how you're feeling emotionally. There's so much. It's such a technical thing to do, really. It takes so much effort and it takes so much thought. Even though the thoughts are automatic, there's such a big part of it. It's no wonder it's draining, really, when you think
Yes.
about it.
yeah.
And there are times, like you mentioned just about it, how my brain just, I
We all
had
do
it.
it. It's fine.
I am so sorry.
Don't worry.
I had this perfect thing. I'm like, okay, focus on it, remember it. And then it's like, poof. And that's kind of a part of it too, is that
It is.
moments
It
you'll have
absolutely is.
this thing that you want to say and it's perfect. And then it's like, poof. But
It's exactly a
oh,
part of it, isn't it?
yes, it is. And it's frustrating at times. Now, you mentioned that you didn't have quite issues with your with depression or anxiety. But I wanted to mention that the paralysis that I feel that you mentioned is actually has for me kind of caused anxiety and depression
Yeah.
because it's like I know what I want to do and I have this list of what I want to do, but it's like I can't do it.
Yeah. You're right. It's really very distressing, isn't it? It feels like you're not in control of your body. I think the example that goes around Instagram a lot is kind of like really wanting to do the dishes, but you sat on the settee looking lazy, and in your head you're screaming at yourself to do the dishes.
Yep.
And that in itself is frustrating. But then it can reach that kind of point where you can become really very angry with yourself, and you can feel really kind of almost inadequate because other people can get up and do the dishes when they don't want to. And what if people don't understand why you just cannot do the dishes? And it becomes kind of like almost you have daggers pointing in at yourself,
Yep.
and it feels really quite cutting, and you feel really betrayed by yourself in a way.
Yes.
There's a lot goes into that kind of paralysis, and then when it's things like work where it's really important because it's putting food on the table, but you still can't do it. And then when there's no logic because it's something you love, because I truly loved the work I did, but I just couldn't make myself go. And then I didn't really know and even if you say to someone, it's ADHD paralysis, they'll kind of go, yeah, okay, so it's hard, but you can stand up and you can walk.
Yeah.
You can get to the door, you can get out, and you can sit at a computer, but you really can't. And
Yeah.
it's hard to put into words. And then there's these other factors as well. I don't know if you experience as well, but it kind of comes with this brain fog, where your head is so full like cotton wool and you can't quite put words together. Some days it affects me speech, and in a job where you need to talk, that's a scary thing.
Yeah.
I worked in a mental health helpline, so it was one call after another call after another call, and then when you can't trust on your power of speech, it's really quite scary
Yeah.
when it's your whole work. So I'd go to work and I'd go, no, I can't be here today, and then I'd have to go home, and it would be so distressing because I knew once I got home, I'd kind of go into autopilot. I'd go up to bed because it was the only place I felt safe. And then, even though it was a safe space, I knew I could be stuck there for days.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's not where I wanted to be, I wanted to be with the kids or I wanted to be helping people. I was just stuck.
Yeah. And it's frustrating, it's frightening, and it's exhausting in and of itself, too. Because your brain is just going 10 billion miles a minute.
Hyperdrive, isn't it?
Yeah, and all of the things that you should be doing, that you could be doing, and oh, look, there's a squirrel, and kind of moment. And it's just all of this kind of bombards in your head. And people don't realize it, how when you're not neurodivergent and you're neurotypical and your thoughts come one after another like normal, and you can think on something, think on that, solve that, then the next issue comes up. And for us, it's like there's that problem, there's the shiny object over here. Oh, look, there's more problem over here. Somebody's upset. And all of these things are at the same time, even if they're not happening at the same time. It's in your head at the same time.
Yeah, you're right. And then there's kind of, I don't know if it's something you find as well, right? Because this one is a big one for me. When you get up in the morning, because the morning's always the hardest time of my day, I'll get up and I'll go, right, I need to clean my teeth. I need to get washed. I need to get out of the bed. I've got to put slippers on because my feet can't be on the floor. I've got to do this. And then by the time you get the fifth thing, you're like, God, there's so much. How do I put all this in order? And putting that into a list in itself is exhausting. And, I have friends who say, no, you just get up and go. I was like, but how do you know where you're going?
Yeah.
How do you know which thing you're going to do first? How do you know which one's going to save you the most energy? Like showering is the hardest thing ever because there's so many steps in it.
Yes, I've taken I have to do showers at night.
Yeah.
I can't stand doing it during the day anymore. It's just like it's too much time, and I need to be doing something else at that time anyway. But I can kind of slow down and do it at night. And then there's, of course, the issue of, but when do I wash my hair? Because you're not supposed to sleep on wet hair. And so those things kind of, rattle off in my head. And it's exhausting too. And then I would come home from work so tired and so mentally drained that, and, I apologize to Mike and my kids for this, but I didn't have much for them.
I can absolutely relate to that. It was a big part of why I came out of work, because when I was burning out, they were getting longer and longer, these kind of ADHD paralysis, and I really genuinely couldn't get out of bed. So I could kind of hear my whole world going on outside my bedroom door. And I'd so desperately want to be a part of it. But every battery I had, whether it was social, emotional, psychological, or physical, they were all drained. It was really like feeling my life was happening outside of my bedroom door, and I couldn't be a part of it.
Yeah.
So I can absolutely relate to what you're saying there. It's a really terrible feeling.
Yeah, because I wanted to, there was so much I wanted to do with the kids and with Mike, and that I used to be able to do before. But it's like I got to a point of where I was so exhausted from masking that I had nothing left by the time I would get home. And that's the one place I could be myself. But I couldn't even do that because I was tired.
Yeah, it takes the energy away, so you never really get that time to explore who you are, really.
Yeah, and that's kind of my journey now, is that through therapy, I'm finding myself much happier because the depression and the anxiety is lifting the more that I learn about myself, and knowing that a lot of what I felt was wrong wasn't wrong. It's just I think differently.
Yeah, Are you being kinder to yourself now then? Is that
Yes,
kind of how
I've
it's good?
found that I'm kinder to myself, and like I'm realizing that a lot of those things, yes, I still do have depression and anxiety,
Of
but
course, yeah.
they're brought, a lot of the things that were brought on, a lot of the attacks that happened were because I am autistic.
Yeah,
And I didn't know that for so long. I just thought I was wrong, I was off, I was weird. Nobody
yeah,
can relate to me because I have troubles, and like, I don't look, like I said, I didn't want to do my hair growing
yeah,
up. I just wanted to put it in a ponytail and go. I didn't want to wear makeup. I didn't want to have to wear the designer clothes or worry about any of that because it's just like it's clothes, it's going to get, tossed anyway.
yeah,
It's a means to an end so you don't get arrested being naked.
yeah,
Was kind of how I saw things.
yeah,
And because of that, a lot of other girls would kind of be like, you're just weird. Why aren't
yeah,
you like these girls? Why don't you want to do your hair? Why don't you want to do makeup? And worry about all of those things. So it got ingrained in my head. You're
yeah,
you're wrong. You're off. And
yeah,
so that kind of compounds itself over years of feeling, of course, as a teenager anyway, neurotypical or not, you're going to feel off and weird and out of place. But when
yeah,
you're neurodivergent, all of those feelings are like tenfold because
yeah,
you're self aware of the fact that you're not doing what the other girls, or in Mike's case, other guys are doing. You're not
yeah.
at that level. You don't care, or it's not that you don't care, that's not who you are. That's not your interest.
That's right. That's right. And I can see how that would kind of it compounds, doesn't it? And then you carry it. You know what you don't heal, you carry.
Yeah.
It's always kind of the way it goes. And I love that that's something to be worked on now. It's great. I love when anybody says they're working through things like that because what people don't realize is it just kind of goes on a backpack otherwise.
Yes.
You just
Yep.
keep carrying that up the hill until you can't anymore, and you can either empty the backpack or get crushed by it, can't you?
Yeah.
It's
It's
kind of
kind
where
of,
it goes to.
who is that Greek Roman thing where the guy has to continuously push that huge boulder up
Yes.
a hill, and then as soon as he gets it up at the top, it rolls back down,
Yeah.
and he has to keep doing. I can't remember the name of the dude, but anyway,
I wish I knew it, but I know the story you're telling.
but that's kind of how it feels until
Yeah.
you are able to learn who you are. Is
Yeah.
just you're constantly pushing a boulder up a hill, and sometimes the boulder goes past you and sometimes it rolls over you.
Yeah.
And then you got to spit out the dirt and everything and keep going and keep going. And then it's like when you learn that it's not because of, you're just wrong, and you learn it's because you're neurodivergent. Oh my God, the boulder becomes like a tissue,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I love that.
it's such a freeing feeling. And I wish I had been able to figure this out sooner. And I kind of, which angers me a bit because I had been to therapists before, but none of them like put two and two together. Doctors didn't put two and two together.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we need to kind of change and fix
You're right.
because
Yeah.
there's so much suffering that maybe it's because they're neurodivergent and they're thinking that they're just disgusting human beings or something because they think differently than other people, when in actuality it's just you think differently.
Absolutely that. It is. It's something that I think so many care professionals need more training in.
Yeah.
Especially now that because I know even like 5 or 6 years back, it was a case where people thought that you would grow out of ADHD. So even if you got your diagnosis, you were a young boy, you got your diagnosis, people thought by the time you were in your mid-20s, you were going to have grown out of it. And so there's kind of a catch-up on both parts because I know the work I did, I spoke to a lot of people who were very affected by physical hyperactivity. And it had, even as an adult, it had such a massive impact on their life. Such a huge, devastating impact. It affected work, it affected everything. It's something really as a society as a whole, we need to understand more about, because it is just a different neurotype. There's the statistics that say about 25% of people could be autistic. So then you wonder, is this neurodivergent, or is this just a different brain type?
Yeah.
Do we need to integrate more so that there's not as many works that's about productivity, there's more about creativity, there's more that works for everyone?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's definitely something where I think it is something where society need to kind of reevaluate how we look at things.
Yeah.
As a whole, really.
Is that kind of play into why you chose to do coaching for adults instead of for children?
Yeah, absolutely. It would have been maybe a bit of an easier step to be a coach for mums that focus on helping them with their children. But you can get that help anywhere. The support for the mum, for her well-being, for her journey of self-discovery,
Yeah.
for her confidence and happiness, and even just learning who she is, it seemed really important to do. And it can be the stay-at-home mum, and it can be the working mum, any mum. I just think it's so important to be at your very best,
Yes.
to enjoy your life and also to enjoy your children, because so many people dream of having their little people, and then they find themselves stuck in their room because their batteries are depleted.
Yes.
And they don't know how to recharge them. So it feels so. And then the other thing I really wanted to do was build the service that I wanted. Everything that I wanted it to be that I couldn't find, I wanted to give to the next people kind of getting their diagnosis or in their journey, so they don't feel that kind of shame and aloneness. It's, I said before, I was really bad with numbers, and I can't remember dates, even down to my children's birthdays. I love the babies to bits, they're my whole world, but numbers screw me that much. I just don't even. And it used to always be so embarrassing when I had to fill in school forms, because I'd have to pretend to be texting someone and have the kid's date of birth wrote down.
Yep.
There was one time I took Emily to a dance class, and I didn't realize I'd have to fill a form in, and I had to write down her date of birth, and I had to say to the dance teacher, I don't know it. And the look I got, I can still see it in my head now.
Yep.
My babies are my whole world. Everything I do is for them. I love spending time with them, but there's parts where even knowing coaching and counseling and all the rest of it, you still get caught in that kind of shame because it's so conditioned.
Yep.
And it kind of still feels like, I know it's a small story to tell, but it feels like a really difficult one. So it feels like something where you could be really quite judged on by somebody who doesn't understand. So like, well, it's the date you give birth. Of course you should know it. It's not a small thing.
No, it's not a small thing, but it's
a tricky one, I think.
I remember numbers. Like, I can remember my zip codes in all the states that I lived in from birth to now. And I can remember phone numbers very well. But if you were to ask me my children's birth dates, I would have to stop and I'd have to think for a moment. Or sometimes I've been at the doctor's office and they said, well, what's their birth date? And I'll give mine. Yeah. And then I'll be like, wait a minute, no.
Our boys' birthdays are like just a little over a year apart.
Yeah.
So one's 2007, one's 2006. And I switched their year on health insurance form once. So every time we would go to the doctor, he would get problems because the date of birth didn't match every time with the insurance.
And
it's
it's just, you get so used to being shamed for that. Because, especially as parents, you're supposed to remember everything. And, I mean, you should remember some things about your child growing up. Don't be like, those parents where you're just kind of like, they grew up. You don't want to be that either. But it's hard to remember, especially like when you're put on the spot, to physically remember, oh, crap, which child are we talking about? And, oh, crap, what's the date? And, things like that. And we shouldn't have to be shamed for that. And
Yeah.
I kind of think that it comes from maybe there's more neurodivergence and less neurotypicals, but neurotypicals got to be in the power.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's kind of a case where what was thought of as the norm just kind of carried on, even when people all diverged away from it. There's probably more neurodivergent people than we even, well, there's certainly more than we even know about, because people are just finding out now. And tomorrow someone else will find out, but I think we've just kind of got stuck in the idea of what the norm is. And just kind of carried on down that line.
And it's just, you always hear about history being, it's about the white male, wealthy landowners and such that did that. And maybe it was a part of that as well, that that was a small group of people who thought neurotypically, but the rest of us are neurodivergent.
Yeah.
And that we're the neurotypicals and they're neurodivergent.
It's fun to think, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I like that one a lot. And it could so easily be that it's kind of it benefits kind of that capitalist landscape that we're moving through right now. Productivity is king. It's important. We'll just keep going with this, because you can be the most wonderfully creative person in the world, but you'll probably get further by being quite productive instead.
Yes.
With the way people are rewarded now, it comes from being the most productive or the most useful, not necessarily the best at anything or the most creative, or all the things that we can do is kind of not the celebrated thing.
Yeah, it's stifled. And for productivity, that doesn't always mean anything, because at the end of the day, when your time comes, nobody really thinks of, man, I should have made that extra $1 that day. It's always, I wish I had more time to be with friends and family.
Yeah, it's never going to be, I wish I really could have pushed that sale a bit more.
Yeah. I mean, on your deathbed, I could have sold another mattress, damn it. It's not that thought process that goes through your head. And nobody ever says that. In any of the literature and studies, nobody says, I wish I had sold that extra notebook or something. It's always, I wish I had more time with my friends and family. And so that tells you right there that productivity for the sake of productivity is not the end all and be all and should not be the focus of our lives.
With that being said, I'm going to say I wish we had more time. But we're running out of time. And before we go, I wanted to give you an opportunity to let people know, I don't know, like how to find you and kind of talk about what you do.
I wish I'd actually kept that up, but I am on Instagram. And I think the handle is Compassionate Coach Fiona.
Yes.
And
it is.
We're called Compassionate Coaching with Fiona because it is really about finding that kind and compassionate way to work through something that is really quite difficult and really quite challenging. And I'm always there for chat if you ever want to just come over and say hi even.
And I have to add that I really thank you for your work, because it is so needed. It is so necessary.
Definitely.
And it is beautiful being able to, have somebody out there understand that we all have our issues and such, and that we just need somebody to kind of help us navigate those things.
Have somebody on our side.
Yeah, and it's not always...
It really is that, it's just about kind of not being alone with it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And working through things completely at your own pace. The program itself is so very highly personalized that we can work through whatever you want to at your own pace. And it's just, I love doing it. It's a lovely way to help people. So
Yes.
That's really great.
And I appreciate that.
And thank you very much for your time today,
Yes.
talking to us. This has been a wonderful conversation.
It has been
Thank
awesome.
you so much for having us.
Are you going to say it?
No, is that it? Are we done?
Yes.
All right.
We'll say bye now.
All right. Bye.
If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Please leave a rating for us wherever you listen. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok.
Othering Podcast is brought to you by Loudcore Productions in conjunction with your support. Your host, Mike and Dory Morris, graphics by Joshua Morris, and join us next week on the Othering Podcast.